you. I'll have to remember that, recovering consultant. It's great to be here. So yes, I'll be talking about accessibility and inclusion. I don't know how many of you know SumUp here in Berlin. It's a bit of a quite visible brand. We make little card readers, but we also make quite a few varieties of other financial services for small merchants. And I care a lot about accessibility, so I really want to talk about it because in my house, I have one in every room. I remember the day when I suddenly couldn't read a menu in a restaurant and the absolute sheer terror and panic because I had succumbed to the fact that I needed reading glasses. But that's just the tip of the iceberg of really quite an important part of designing humanely, if you will, thinking about accessibility for the billions of people in the world that have some level of disability, whether or not it is something that is a physical disability or a cognitive disability or a temporary disability, which I'll talk about in a minute. And it's a pretty significant part of the population, if you really think about it. And we just listened to a great presentation on inclusion and diversity, and that's how we like to think about it, that accessibility is about really being inclusive to all the merchants that we want to be addressing. So we can think about the permanent disabilities, which is a little bit more of our common sense, which is about colorblindness or physical disabilities. But it is also something that I call more temporary, which can be temporary, like we break a leg, or at some point when you age, you need your reading glasses, or like my father, who I tried to wheel around Berlin in a wheelchair for the first time this Christmas and had very interesting dilemmas and experiences. But it also really impacts business quite a bit. The data is quite significant, and I think 79% of people who are trying to use a website that isn't accessible, they will click away. And the calculated loss of that revenue to other businesses, because they actually are willing to pay more for an accessible experience, is estimated to be in the 6.9 billion in annual lost revenue to the companies that are not able to deliver an accessible experience. So we think about accessibility as being about diversity and about being inclusion, because we have quite a diverse audience ourselves. We have merchants around the world. Not everybody has lovely LTE or higher connectivity. As a matter of fact, even in just an hour or two drive east of the city of Berlin, we run into very similar situations with very low bandwidth. That's really important. We tend to design in the nice offices that we sit in and work in with really lovely high-res devices, but that's not the reality for quite a few of the people in the world, and also in our case, for our merchants. So we really want to think about what are all the different ways in which people can actually use our products and how do we really serve them. So I want to talk briefly about why this matters, especially to us at SumUp. I believe everybody can think about accessibility to at least a minimum capacity, or maybe even go further to include diversity and inclusion. And then where are we on this journey? Because it's very easy to say, yes, this is important, but it really does take a commitment, and it is a journey to really get there. So for SumUp, accessibility is really part of our mission. We have a mission statement where we talk about we want to create a world where everyone can build a thriving business. And when we talk about everyone, we really mean that. We are, like I mentioned, all over the world, but we said, okay, if we want to be that if we want to reach our merchants, we need to actually include that in who we want to be as a company. And accessibility is one of our core brand characteristics. And when we think about that, we really want to say everyone, anytime, anywhere, and that can be about the price point. It can be about where you're located in the world and what kind of connectivity and access you have. So truly, we want to empower merchants. We want to empower them to actually live a very successful life, either doing what they love or what they have to do in order to support their families. And in that regard, we want to be truly accessible and really live that commitment. I mentioned being global. We are functioning in 36 countries around the world. Just our last office opened up in Australia, but we have quite a strong presence in Latin America, all over Europe, and also in the United States. And we overall serve 3.5 million different merchants on a daily basis. So it's quite a diverse group, and not everybody sits in an office. But we also have to think about how people are doing in motion, in real world. You know, what is their lives really like? How many actually card readers do people really have in their office? What happens when they break down or when they can't use them, or situations arise that we may not anticipate? So how do we actually take that in consideration and really design for any time, anywhere, for anyone? So when I joined SumUp 3.5 years ago, I said, okay, let's commit to the basics. So we'll talk about what we have been doing, and I believe really almost everybody can follow some basic thinking of accessibility and how they design. Then how do we actually deliver the vision? And we have some really interesting regulations coming up that will really drive this necessity for us to embrace it. And then how do you actually live the culture of it? So committing to the basics, there's quite a few different guidelines. We aim for the AA as a sort of one of the minimum ones. Sometimes we try to actually go a little bit higher in our accessibility guidelines. But from a visual layer perspective, we are trying to hit quite a few standards that are defined as the AA standards. I'm not going into a lot of them right now, but you can definitely look them up. But they have a lot to do with the contrast. They have a lot to do with how colors are reading. And it also turns out that about 83% of our websites today are not accessible just purely on the visual layer. So we said, okay, let's be serious about this, and we looked at our own app and our own services and applied the ratios and the contrast guidelines also from a size and color perspective, and really started to fix some of the basics, just tuning the blue, increasing the type size by just a little bit, a couple of points makes a big difference. Starting to look at labels and saying, okay, everything is going to be a label as well as an icon, not just standalone. So we've been able to improve it quite a bit, and we are planning on doing another major release next year where we go towards a much more black and white experience, which overall is, in one hand, more accessible, but it also brings some additional challenges for people who actually get headaches when they have too high contrast of a visual display. So we are really looking to work and how do we get better at, even at the visual layer, serving a variety of different needs. We picked our colors. We have black, it's not quite black, and white, but then we also really believe we need these semantic colors. We had long debates about the yellow not really being yellow, but we also said, if we're going to really be committed to accessibility, gotta bite the bullet and get over the fact that the yellow is a little bit more orange, and really deliver something that is actually meeting the guidelines. Color blindness is very frequent and common in the world, especially for men. I think it's like 8%. But there's also a really big variety of different kinds of color blindness. And most of the tools these days we have available, like even Figma, they have different filters. So you can really do your own homework and verify if indeed what you're working with actually works. Even here you can see that there's a couple of them that are still not quite there, but in relative percentages of the population that are affected by it, we really try to say, okay, can we get better, and what do we need to do to balance not only the color but also language to overcome, or iconography to overcome some of these challenges. We also said, okay, we had developed a lot of custom components in part of our design system, which of course didn't leverage at all some of the built-in accessibility aspects of the operating systems, and we said, why? Why do that? So we really went back and committing to using the components that come with the various OSs that naturally adapt. You know, if you're actually increasing the type size so you can read better, if you need reading glasses, then the whole interface can actually respond to that. So we can leverage a lot of what is already built into the tools and into the platforms that we're using. For example, if you can, one of the things that we were looking at, if you set your phone to high contrast, does it really actually, you know, how does it actually scale? How does it behave? And can we take advantage of that? So we believe everybody can do this. Everybody can really pay attention to the color, to the type size, to the, avoiding little tiny gray text on gray backgrounds, and then really getting to that basic accessibility. There's a lot about clear and consistent language. I can really empathize with the previous story about trying to read German legal documents. I freak out every time, and believe it or not, German is my mother tongue, and I still don't understand it. But it's actually easier written, and it's harder to do. We still have a great UX writer and still catching lots of things that are being written that don't make sense at all. There's a lot about good practices, and then leveraging some of the tools that we all have access to, and then really testing with people in the real world. We want to also have people that have different kinds of disabilities really testing our products. Is something we are really working on, so we can start doing that next year. But then also, what is really the context of use? You know, if people are using these devices in really, really, really bright sunlight in Brazil, does the display actually really work for them? Or does it actually fade out? Can they really read it? Can they really use it? And adhering to those AA guidelines. Now, the guidelines go way beyond the visual layer. There's a lot about accessibility through various screen readers that need to be built in. It's a whole setup and rules around different tagging so that they can be, again, read out to you if you have visibility challenges. There's a lot about also that kind of clarity in language that helps people with different language skills to be able to understand what is actually they need to be doing. And then this perceivability of alternate text, and there's got different tags for different uses of media. Lots and lots is in place that we can really need to start to pay attention to. And I think it was 92% of federal websites, and I assume I'm going to make an assumption it's going to be the US websites, are not accessible in the United States. And then if we actually extrapolate that to all the websites in the world, we really believe that there's very few of the websites who really, really, really actually adhere to some of the very, common mistakes that are listed here. So we went through our very first audit a couple of years ago and said, okay, what do we need to do? What can be built into our design system to get better at that more fundamental way in which to provide accessibility? We did the audits and we fixed quite a few things, but that's already 2 years ago. And then our design system team scattered a little bit, and lo and behold, we now are back to having to say, okay, where are we and what do we need to do to really commit to this accessibility that's so much at the heart of who we say we are as a company. And I don't know if it's the carrot or the stick, but I'm also saying this is coming, and it's coming to all of us here in Europe. The European Accessibility Act was passed in 2019. It's the European response to the ADA, American Disabilities Act. It was bringing together a lot of the scattered rules that were available in all the different countries and trying to bring it into like one uniform set of rules and guidelines that are currently being written into constitutions or the rules for regulating each of the different members of the European Union. The Act will become effective in 2025 in the summer, so we have a little bit over a year and a half to figure out what we're going to do to be ready for it. It affects websites, e-readers, banking services, mobile devices, everything. We don't quite know yet how it will affect our hardware card readers, but we're also doing accessibility overlays, so we have to anticipate that this will also apply there. And yes, we have to really follow these various basic guidelines and rules and regulations. Statistically, lawsuits against companies who have websites that are not accessible have been on the rise. They increased by 20% in 2020 and by another 15% in 2021. I shared a lot of this with my company just yesterday, and I said, I'm sure we don't want to be the first poster child who will be caught not actually following these guidelines in 2025, because each one of the countries can sue us individually. And the lawsuits that are already going on with companies like Spotify are going sometimes in the millions. So while the small breach might only cost a couple of thousand, the potential of these lawsuits being really quite costly and quite high. So it's something we are going to take really quite seriously, and we're in the process of going through our audit so we can start making a plan and really have 2024 be the year we get ready for 2025. And we do think, probably like most of your organizations, we have a lot of complexities, a lot of pressure to develop new features. So how do we start to actually embed a really good, strong, solid practice into our development process so it becomes self-sustaining? Because as soon as you take your eyes off, we know already what has happened, it really quite degrades quite quickly. So we're going to leverage our design system as a way in which to drive that. But we are also working very actively to create this narrative in the company. I'm waiting to have the audit and exact plan in place so I can really start to corral the community of product developers, designers, and also product managers, because really everybody has to be committed to it. And then we need to make sure we have the capacity to actually fulfill. I think this is an opportunity for us, so we're definitely taking that kind of positive spin that this is also really related to who we are as a company and will allow us to live our brand and who we want to be to our merchants in the most holistic and true and authentic way possible. But reality is probably everybody in this room will have to grapple with this sometime between now and 2025. Now, we view accessibility to be about inclusion and diversity and inclusion, and this has been a core part of SumUp's journey in the last 3 years to actually build a culture that really lives on our values. So we can not only give lip service to, yes, accessibility is important, but how do we actually practice that level of diversity and inclusion in the company? And this is really a great quote, again, from our CEO, from Daniel, that diversity and inclusion is not only what we call as a human right, but it's really something we need to do because it is the right thing to do, and it happens to also be good for business. We think about our D&I program in 3 different ways, and I'm only going to cover the internal one a little bit. We spend a lot of time looking at what do we need to do inside of the company so that our very diverse employee base feels like we're really taking care of inclusion, and they can actually feel really comfortable being themselves, and I'll share some stats on that in a minute. But as Adam said, we also really focus on research. We want to understand our merchants. Now, unfortunately, we don't have the data that says even how many of our merchants are women or how many of them have disabilities, but we really go out to the community and work with our merchants to really understand both their actual abilities or disabilities and or also what the contexts are in which they're using our products. And then we really commit to communities, and I'll share a video in a second that highlights of some of the things that we're doing around the globe to really also give back to the communities that we serve. So from an internal perspective, we look at senior leadership engagement. We have training courses we've run with all of the executives. We are also running training courses regularly for our various leaders so that we can create that sensitivity to what we already heard about unconscious bias. You know, these sort of moments of microaggressions that we are sometimes not even aware of because of the kind of culture that we grew up in, or or the behaviors that we watch around us. What are our processes for hiring? You know, are we writing our job descriptions in a way that is actually open and inclusive, or do we even have some bias in those? And then what is all the the processes involved in supporting that experience for potential employees? We have quite diverse members in our employee base, and what are the communities that we can support to actually have people self-organize and really feel empowered inside of our company. There are some very unique qualities in our different markets. Sofia is very different from Brazil, for example, in terms of even like transgender community. So how do we adapt our processes that really work in the context of the country and the culture that's there? We've accomplished quite a bit, and I say this we, I'm a bit royal in that way. It's actually a team of 3 people who've been amazingly persistent. But we've been focusing a lot on what's our male and female leadership, especially at the executive level, because we have been quite male dominant, if you will. We're making progress in the last 2 years. We have a really great rating on our ENPS, where people really feel like they can be themselves at SumUp, and those numbers have been really going up quite well, and especially in our transgender community, which is very, very important to us at SumUp. And the fact that the values have been increasing means that we've been making progress very slow, but steadily, and I think that's the journey that diversity and inclusion is really all about, whether it's internal or external. So I'm going to share a video that is a summary we did from 2022 to 2023, but it highlights a couple of the external things that we're also doing to help. One more statistic. Yes, we are now, we have 93 different nationalities in our employee base. We're about 3,500 employees globally. So let me share this. Quite a bit that we've accomplished and so much more to do. It's definitely quite remarkable, but then especially if we want to bring this topic of accessibility into our own product and development teams, this is something that we need to continue to work on. So it is something that I want to share as a journey. Like I said, I've been here 3.5 years, and the most basic thing was really focusing on the visual layer and really committing to how we refactor our basic typography and color palette and everything else. We can at least address 83% of topics that have to do just with that level of inaccessibility. We're gearing up to deliver the vision, which is to really be accessible in all of the different ways that the regulators require, but also in the way that we believe is important to fulfill our mission of serving everybody, helping them build a thriving business. And then our journey on building the culture is continuous and something that we really are passionate about. And I just think it's amazing what the team of 3 people have been able to accomplish in the 2 years which we've been running the program. So thank you. I hope I was able to inspire you to take this topic up, take it seriously. Reading glasses are probably coming your way, but it's something really powerful and I think really important for us to really live by. So thank you very much.